Good morning, everyone. There is no handout. We had that good question because last week's handout, we didn't even get there. We're still not there. So that will be for next week. A very good question was asked. What king or wise man will Rabbi Aaron Bisno be next week in the Christmas pageant? To clarify, there will be a class next week at 10. We'll leave a little bit earlier so Aaron can go put on his costume. How many wise men or kings are there in the Bible? Not true. It doesn't. We three kings. The story, so what book of the Bible do the wise men or magi appear? It's only in one spot, Matthew. And I say this, I know I said it last year. We conflate stories from Luke, Mary, baby Jesus, John the Baptist, and Matthew, the wise men, and stick those together. Those are very different stories we put into one. There's a great hymn, however, We Three Kings of Orient Are. And the reason we normally say three kings is because there are three gifts. And so maybe three kings each brought one gift type of deal. What were those gifts, by the way? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I saw a great cartoon once, or I think isn't that in Life of Brian? Thanks for the gold, you can keep the frankincense and myrrh. Why are frankincense and myrrh valuable? They're preservatives, it's also incense, it's also an anointing of a death spice. So it has all these different symbolic pieces going on. Later in church history, so legend, not Bible, the three kings got names, and the names are Balthazar, Gaspar, Melchior. You see, if you want to do it properly at your own house, you have a creche or nativity set, don't put the baby Jesus in there yet. Of course not till the Christmas Eve. You got animals, and how many animals, by the way, appeared in the Luke story of Christmas? 0. There was in a feeding trough, in a barn, a manger, so we just put them in there, but they're not actually in the story. However, if you try to get rid of the animals of Christmas pageant, that's a non-starter. We're keeping those. And so we have animals in there. You don't put the baby Jesus in, but angels, Joseph, the rest. The wise men show up where? Where do you put them? Really, to do it properly, and I used to have fun doing this in another church. You have the nativity set, up front or wherever. We had the wise men appear in the back of the church. And then on Advent 1, Advent 2, move them a window or two. So they got a little closer. And they don't actually arrive until when? January 6th, the Feast of the Epiphany. It's just like the song, 12 days of Christmas. So Christmas Eve, 24th, 25th, all the way until January 6th. So that's the story. There is I say that because it's about to happen, and there's a very interesting parallel I hope we get to, and we referenced it last time, about a miracle birth. But we didn't do something important. Would you pray for us, Aaron?
Sure. So I'll offer the blessing over study, and then I was asked to give you a translation that's a little bit more precise, perhaps, than I've been using before. The blessing, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Its translation is, blessed art thou, source of life in the universe, who has commanded us to engage ourselves with Torah, with texts of meaning and significance. Amen.
Aaron is preaching 3 times today. In the synagogue, how many times do you preach on the Sabbath? 3 times?
Not typically, once.
Once. So it's whoa, 3 times. He's got to kind of build up to that for a while. I don't want to give away the sermon. It's really quite brilliant. but I'll just suggest that how many of you have heard it? Few? There's a parallel idea to the one that he brings up, and that is in the Saint Benedict or Benedictine, the monastic tradition, that we treat one another, every guest, and this is also operative in the story we'll get to in a little bit. Every person you encounter, you treat as if that person is Jesus. So if somebody comes to the monastery or in your life, if you encounter them, the annoying driver who cut you off or didn't let you in, the person at the store, your boss, your whatever, you treat that person like that's Jesus Christ himself in your very presence. And then the idea is you begin to see each person has the presence of Christ within them. They're a child of God. They have innate dignity and so on. And then you treat them more and more like Jesus, and then you treat yourself that way, and it's a transformative relationship for you internally as well as with the world. So remember, Aaron is not preaching heresy, and it is not blasphemous, though he does ask the question, is it? The short answer is no, it isn't. In fact, it's an old tradition to imagine yourself as Jesus in our own faith life. Who remembers where we ended last time? Anybody? Where did we end last week in class, and what chapter exactly? Chapter 18. A son is promised to Abraham and Sarah. What story did we just hear, we're about to hear? Actually, we'll hear it the fourth Sunday of Advent, only that one service at 11 a.m. Who's promised to Mary in the Luke story that we're about to hear? Anybody remember whose the birth is about to be celebrated? Oh my gosh, what's our name? Christians, Jesus the Christ. Whew, okay. Tough crowd here today, Aaron. I might let you take over.
Right.
So we're about to celebrate the birth of Christ, and it is a miracle birth. Very briefly, in the book of Luke, Mary is about how old? 15-ish, and she's betrothed to be married to probably an older man, not crazy older, but established. We don't know, 30, give or take, that's a guess. And in that culture, marriage was a two-step process. So betrothed is, for all practical purposes, they're married, but they've not lived together, they've not consummated the marriage, but they our terms would identify as husband and wife. But Mary and Joseph had not known each other. Operative word, that also is in the book of Genesis. That's a euphemism for had sexual relations. He had not known her yet. So in that story, she is visited by this, what's the angel's name? Gabriel. Does Gabriel mean anything?
Yes. Gibor El is God is my strength.
God is my strength. So the angel, here's a tough question. How do angels usually appear in stained glass windows, art, as male or female? Kind of masculine, but they are neither male nor female. They are androgynous. They're angels. They are sexless in that sense, which is a very interesting idea, but often they're portrayed as males. Anyway, Gabriel appears to Mary, and Mary presumably is going about her business, whatever a betrothed young woman is thinking about. And this presence of God, this angel. Now, when we think of angels, masculine figure, big, unless you got little cherubs, but we're not talking about that. Wings, whatever that is, every single angel in the Bible says the same thing when they appear, which is some version of what? Don't be afraid, fear not, which suggests to me they are really scary looking. They are dramatic. It is unexpected. It's fantastic. It is celestial, heavenly, and so on and so forth. So don't be afraid. So however this angel appears and speaks to her and says, you're going to have a baby, and it'll be from the Holy Spirit. And could you imagine, like, what? That was yours? Thank you, Charles. Huh? What? How can this, her response is what? How can this be, since I have not known a man? I'm a virgin. People know that you need A to get B. You can't skip a step. And how is this supposed to be? And it doesn't make any sense. And why me? And you get all those questions. The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and you'll be with child. And look now, even your cousin Elizabeth is pregnant with John the Baptist. And so this miracle birth happens. The miracle is she had not had sexual relations. It's not supposed to happen. So there's this story. Did we make up this story from whole cloth? Is this a unique miracle birth story? The short answer is no, it is not. Where's the beginning of that, Aaron? 18:1?
Yeah. Allison?
Say that again. Do they have to make, did the church or somebody make Mary's mother Anne a saint to legitimize her? Short answer is more or less yes.
To legitimize the choice of Mary.
I differ with the theology behind that, because to me it seems more important not that Mary's mom was particularly good or saintly or virtuous or had the right pedigree, whatever that right pedigree might be. Oh, it's expected, of course. She was going to go on to a great school and have a great career, because to me, that's completely at odds with the story. What makes more sense to me is she's an absolute nobody from no place with no future, no connections, and somehow, for some reason, that's the person God chose. A woman, obviously, but women in that culture were not equal to men. By the way, who's the lowest in that culture? Men, women, slaves, children, kind of right together. So she's a nobody, and God chose her. And so her mother was also a nobody. Not super, maybe she was saintly. Every mother to a degree is saintly. I think we can all agree on that. More saintly if you have a teenager. Is that a fair statement? Yeah, more or less. So that is the case that the church canonized Anne, but I don't think that necessarily is important to the story.
There's a lot in the Roman Catholic Church about Mary's birth itself she was born sinless. That's why there's like the Feast of the Immaculate Conception.
Oh.
There's also this belief that she ascended into heaven herself. So there's a lot of Marian beliefs.
Mary, I don't know if you've heard all that. Mary, there's a concept in the Catholic Church called the Immaculate Conception. We, of course, take that in Pittsburgh as something else, the Immaculate Reception. It's where it comes from. Mary's also sinless. In the Eastern Orthodox tradition, Mary bears the title of Theotokos, which is just fantastic, the God-bearer, and takes on this larger role, and you could say sociologically more than theologically, that Mary becomes the feminine aspect of God and more relatable than really distant, big, mean, scary God. Mary takes on that image, that idea. There's also, particularly in medieval times, wonderful image of God is kind of Old Testament grumpy, mean God. And so Mary is the nice face of God, when in fact you can say theologically that's Jesus is the human face. But it'll show a giant Mary wearing, she's always in blue, Mary in blue, and she's got all these people. Imagine, it's not hard to imagine me in a dress since I'm basically wearing one right now. All these people, all of you, I would envelop you within my dress, hide you underneath, and I would sneak you into heaven, right under God's nose. And so Mary has this aspect of being that she'll really listen to us if maybe God won't. That is Roman Catholic, and not necessarily anyone would believe that now, but that's a medieval view. Jeffrey?
And she is also human. So
And she is human.
she's the only figure in that whole thing. Human.
Say that again. She's the only figure with God the Father, Jesus.
Right. That is of a highly holy order, divine. But she is still human. So we can do what she does.
Yes. Does anybody have a Bible in here? It's a very scary question to ask a group of Episcopalians in a Bible study, I will point out. No? Cell phone? Surely you got a cell phone. Here's a quick trick. BibleGateway.com has a whole bunch of helpful translations at your fingertips. Look up anything. Genesis 18, 1 through 18. And the Lord appeared to Abraham by the great oaks of Mamre as he sat before his tent in the heat of the day, and he looked up and saw three beings standing near him. What are these beings? And when he saw them, he ran from the tent to meet them, and he bowed to the ground and said, "Please, gentlemen, if I may ask you this favor, don't go on past me. Let me bring a little water for you to wash your feet. You can stretch out under the tree, and I will send for a bit of bread, so that you can refresh yourselves that you are here with me, and then you continue on your way." Why would he give them bread? If three people showed up and stood around in your yard, what are you likely to do? Who are you? What are you doing here? Actually, it'd be like look through the curtain or blind. Who are they? I don't recognize them. They're up to no good. Are they casing my house to rob it? Are they waiting for an Uber? You would run through a list of things. Probably, those obviously aren't the case here. Who are these three visitors? He doesn't know. But why does Abraham want to take them bread? What is operative in his mind that he wants to do that? Hospitality. Tell us, Rabbi, within that culture, why is that his initial reaction?
So welcoming guests and the responsibility we have for those who come into our home or come into our place, particularly we know this still exists in the Middle East and in these cultures, right, to be extra solicitous of those who've shown up and appreciating essentially the vulnerability of what it meant to travel distances in that culture. So Abraham is defined in Jewish tradition as the paradigmatical example of hospitality. If he goes a little further, that he'd circumcised himself a few days before, and even as he's in recovery, when he could have had a good excuse for saying, "I'm simply not up to greeting guests," all the more so. Abraham represents the rush to be hospitable, or the responsibility we have to those who visit us.
I'm sorry, I'd never made that connection before. That is the greatest excuse I've ever heard for not being bothered to do something. I just circumcised myself. I don't have to do whatever it is you want me to do right now. I used that, by the way, for a while. I had a heart attack. Oh, yeah, okay, we don't have to do that. I just made that up because it sounds scary and final and dramatic. It was true, I did have a heart attack, but I'm not going to be on that committee anymore. There's no connection between those things. Right. I just find that fascinating. So he offers hospitality. Just relax. And Abraham hurried into the tent and said to Sarah, "Hurry, take a bushel of our best flour, knead it, and bake pita." And Abraham ran to the herd, took a fine plump calf, gave it to the herd boy, and hurried to prepare it. Notice everybody's hurrying. Let's do this quickly. And he took yogurt and milk and the calf that was now ready and sat it all before them. And he stood by them under a tree as they ate. So they're eating, and they said to him, "Where's your wife Sarah?" How would you react to that? Three strange men show up. You give them food and water and yogurt and, here, wash your face, just relax. Where are they going to go with this? You want to be nice to them, so maybe they'll go away. And then they ask, "Where's your wife Sarah?" Why do you want to know?
Also, how do you even know her name?
Great point. How do you know her name? It gets weirder. Instead, Abraham, never one really to, let's say, defend his wife Sarah that well. He's trying to pretend it's his sister, sell her off or whatever. And he said, oh, she's there in the tent. In the house. She just baked all this stuff for you, by the way. And one of them said, I will return to you in 9 months, and Sarah will have a son. That could be unbelievably ominous or unbelievably hopeful. Depends on the context, I guess. And Sarah, why a tent instead of a house? They moved a lot. So that there were nomadic type people. So a tent was their house. You could just pick it up and take it with you. And if you've ever stayed in a tent, they're not soundproof. And in the story, it doesn't say this. I think it's suggested. It strikes me as what I would do. When I was a little kid, I remember watching, or down the hall, I would sneak out of my room at night when I'm supposed to be sleeping. And I had in one house, long hallway, and I could see the television, and with the way it was shaped, I could hear Johnny Carson. And it was way past my bedtime, but I kept hearing my parents laugh, and I wanted to hear what was so funny. So it's like you as a little kid sneaking to the top of the stairs and listening down to the adults' conversation. In this case, Sarah's listening into what they say. So one of the three strangers said, I'll return to you in 9 months, and Sarah will have a son. How old was Sarah at this point? 90-something? Oh, right. Oh. And Sarah had been listening at the entrance to the tent behind him. And there's a little parentheses. Abraham and Sarah were very old, and Sarah had long since stopped having periods. She laughed to herself and thought, withered as I am, can I have a baby and my husband so old too? And one of these men said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and think she's too old to bear a child? That Abraham has got this, like, this is weird. They know her name. She's going to have a baby. I didn't hear her laugh, but they heard her laugh. Why did Sarah laugh and think she's too old to bear a child? Because she is? Everybody knows that? Is anything too marvelous for the Lord? Well, that's a rhetorical question. The answer is no. But this is what the presumably angel says. I will indeed return to you in 9 months, and Sarah will have a son. And Sarah lied and said, I didn't laugh, because she was afraid. And then one of the men said, yes, you did. That cracks me up. Is that supposed to be humorous in Hebrew?
It doesn't read as humorous until you understand the context.
Yeah.
The Hebrew itself isn't. Yeah.
And Sarah lied and said, I didn't laugh. Now, she's an old woman, but it sounds like a kid who knows she's caught. Why would you not want to admit to laughing? Say that? Maybe it's true. I'm trying to put myself in Sarah's sandals here and think, this is just ridiculous. I'm not going to have a baby at my age. Who are these weirdos showing up in the middle of the day, and I got to feed them? I was like doing my own chores already, and now they're telling crazy stuff, and 9 months later they're going to come back and I'm going to have a baby? This is just ridiculous. And then those same crazy people who knew all the stuff, why did you laugh? I didn't laugh. It would be spooky, I would imagine. So they said, yes, you did. They caught her. And then the story ends abruptly. That's it. Sarah laughed, to me, is one of the most beautiful lines in there. Do you have anything you want to add?
Well, sure. When I was in college, I took a course on in literature on gospel parallels. And that's essentially what we're casting a light on. This story in Genesis chapter 18, where Abraham and Sarah receive word that she will conceive a child, most unlikely, the announcement shared by these three otherwise unnamed or unfamiliar characters who sort of alight on this particular day and deliver this news is the basis for the story of, right, the three wise men and Mary's, the announcement that Mary will conceive, and that gospel parallel is really intriguing, particularly if we stick with the idea of the most unlikely of events, right, a miracle birth to a woman who wouldn't otherwise be able to conceive. It's interesting what Jonathon said in conversation here about how unlikely a character Mary was. That is to say, we don't have a background story about her such that it seems rather obvious that she would be the elected one, or she would be the one who would be the mother of Jesus. She's an unlikely person. Her mother, before her, Anne, is that Mary's mother? Also, otherwise unassuming personality. And this shows up in the biblical tradition often. When Moses stands at the burning bush, it's a bush. It's an otherwise unremarkable shrub, if you will. Someone asked me not long ago, earlier in the week, about Mount Sinai. And it must be a significant mountain, or we must know where that is. That in point of fact, the tradition reports that we don't know which mountain it was. It wasn't necessarily the highest mountain, or the one on which you might, if you were going to stage the event, you would look for a particular location that would be dramatic. A presidential candidate announces his or her candidacy, picks a spot that will be significant for such an announcement. But time and again in the biblical tradition, it's an otherwise unremarkable place, or an otherwise improbable figure who then takes on this larger significance. The message being that in the most unlikely of places, or when you least expect it, or that God moves in mysterious and miraculous ways. And time again, that's the story that gets told. And then the implication of that for each of us is really profound, right? Why, we've talked about this before. Why Moses, or why Abraham? Why not Moses? Why not Abraham? Why not you?
That's his sermon today. Sorry.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
They say that rabbis have one sermon. Okay.
Just make it a good one.
Make it a good one.
So you see the parallels there. What does that, I don't talk this way very often, how does that make you feel about the Jesus miracle birth story? Does it change it in any way? Andrea? It's extraordinary in the ordinary, yes. I, in fact, just wrote a similar idea. It's remarkable how unremarkable that is. And you could say that these stories, too, are that way. In that culture, biblical culture is probably a better way to say this. It is very different from our culture in how people would convey information. That's a very broad statement. When you wrote something, it was a sign of respect and a sign that this was meant to be important and authoritative if you borrowed other sources. If I borrowed other sources without citing them and pretended they were my own, that would be called what? Plagiarism. It's a terrible thing. In that culture, that was a great thing. We actually do it all the time. Popular music takes a riff from here or there. You borrow an idea, that's a very normal thing. But so borrowing a story because that idea made sense to them, and it also resonated, it connected. Oh, they would see the echoes or the history that God has actually done this before. That gives it more credibility, not less. Charles?
Is the idea of writing it down an attempt at preservation to keep the story?
Is the idea of writing it down an attempt at preservation? How, in fact, Rabbi, was the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, passed down for a very long time?
Right, so we appreciate that these were oral traditions, right? These were stories that were familiar, they followed certain tropes, and then you're absolutely right. The idea to write them down, to codify them, was a desire to preserve them, right? That's sort of where the trouble begins, of course, right? It's wonderful to have a memory. You all have memories of various events or personages, or right? When you write them down, well, now they're fixed in a different kind of way, where someone reads that and understands whether that's the transcript, or that's, in point of fact, how it happened. I had a professor in rabbinical school, Alan Cooper, who suggested that the most important thing a translator could do for him or herself would be to destroy the original, right? Because a translation is ultimately an interpretation at some level, and now we have these stories to compare with one another. And so if you wanted to translate something, or if you wanted to tell it in your own words, and you want that to be the definitive record, the best thing you could do would be to get rid of the original, right? These stories, miracle births. I'll jump ahead because 'tis the season. There's a wonderful book by John Levinson, who was a professor of religion at Harvard, and the title of the book is called The Death and Resurrection of the Beloved Son. The idea being that in the ancient world, that motif, we're edging up to it, Abraham going to sacrifice Isaac, he's all but dead, but before the story's over, he gets up off the altar and survives the encounter. And so too, I'm a bit over my skis here, right? But the death and resurrection of the beloved Son in Jesus is a similar kind of tale, besting death, if you will. Those kinds of motifs. These were familiar tropes in the larger story, much like some of our greatest literature or media, movies and what happened. We'll follow certain tropes, whether it's a stranger comes to town, whether it's a particular challenge, whether it's an unlikely event, right? We know some of these motifs. So that's what I would say about the proposal.
Jim.
You asked a question. Did this story change our view of Jesus or the virgin birth? And I would say yes.
So does this change his view of the Christmas story? How?
In an interesting way, it makes it less important to me and his ministry and his life story more important. What he did is more important than how he was born.
Yeah. What he did is more important than how he was born or the birth story.
That's what just happened in my head.
Right, so Jim's suggesting that based on Jonathan's question, which is, given that we now have some insight into the story of Abraham and Sarah, being told they'll have a child, unlikely, but so God predicts, so too with Jesus. Does that make your relationship to the story of Jesus' birth change? And Jim's suggesting that, in fact, it doesn't, but it elevates Jesus' ministry in your mind rather than his origin, his birth story, as it were. Yeah. The same professor, Alan Cooper, said in rabbinical school to us, he said, if tomorrow in the desert of Sinai, archaeologists were to uncover some text or some proof that the exodus from Egypt never happened, Jews around the world would still gather for the Passover Seder and tell the story of our exodus from Egypt. Right? So whether or not the story as we read it on a given page of Scripture is true or not, the faith has come to be, or the way in which we move in the world, is no longer dependent upon the historicity of the story, whether the story is accurate, but rather what it points us to, or the significance of it as we orient our own lives. Jeffrey?
The stories all have a context. Once you have it in context, the authority of the story isn't really as powerful as just the fact that this is a big thing. This has been talked about for a long time. It's like lots of versions of this. And so it's not, it's not just, it's more like, say like the history of mathematics. It's a big history. It's not just what came up once we got to this particular idea of mathematics. It's huge.
Well, so if I could, I was suggesting earlier in the week, actually, in a conversation with my father, I said, we have stories in our family, as you have stories in your family. Go back a story 3 generations, say, people you didn't know, but you understood something about where your family came from, or who they were, or, right? These stories have been passed down within generation within the family. Think back just 3 generations. I'm guessing if you're like most, I think, Americans, I say this unencumbered by any facts, that you may very well not know the names, let alone the maiden name of your great-grandmother, and yet you have some sense of who your family is, perhaps, but it matters not whether those stories are true. They've come to inform your own sense of self and your own identity. And we know there have been stories about folks who have, with 23andMe or genetic testing or DNA, have learned things about their own family that they never knew, that perhaps they never needed to know, because the truth of what happened differs from the way in which we came to understand who we are. And now you've got a mess, right? Now you've upended something, because years ago when I was leading a trip through Israel, a teen tour through Israel, on one of the hikes, one of the teenagers asked me if the stories in the Torah, the stories in the Bible, are true. And the classic answer is, they're true, but not because they happen, but because they happen again and again and again. They're true in the mythic sense. Can I prove with verifiable data that it is as it was described? I can't. But that's not what the stories come to do. They don't position themselves as history, but rather as a mythic understanding of the world that we want to be in.
Yeah, I would add that the Exodus story, God delivering Israelites from slavery in Egypt to the Promised Land, which took a long time, is their foundational origin family story. If you think of that like movies or comic books, this tells them who they are. We are a tiny people surrounded by everybody who thinks and acts and lives differently than we do. We have this distinctive mark now, circumcision in this case, to show that we are a covenant people. And it turns out that the larger culture is trying to destroy us. And God will deliver us from that. Has that ever happened to the Jews since then? Yeah, over and over and over. It's their story. Other people want to get rid of them, and God somehow miraculously delivers them. That's who they are. So from Abraham and Sarah and those three visitors, cut scene switches completely to this little historical insertion. Where did Lot, Abraham's nephew, go? Sodom. So not too far away, but go over there. So the story continues. Then the three men stood up and set out towards Sodom. And Abraham walked with them to see them off. And the Lord said to himself, should I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do, since Abraham will become a great nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed in him? No, I will tell him, so that he may instruct his sons and his descendants to act as the Lord wishes, to do what is right and just, so that they might fulfill what was promised. And two of the beings, this is one of the three beings, presumably angels, two of the beings turned and went down towards Sodom, but one of them, standing before Abraham, said, and the Lord said, because the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is so loud, I'm going there myself to see if their sins are as grave as they seem to be. And Abraham stepped forward and said, will you destroy the innocent along with the guilty? What if there are 50 innocent people in the city? Will you really destroy it if there are 50 innocent men? It would be unworthy of you to kill the innocent along with the guilty, so that the innocent are punished like the guilty. That would be unworthy of you. Will the judge of the whole earth act so unjustly? So this Abraham suddenly starts making the case that don't destroy Sodom, because what if there are 50 innocent people there? He's hoping one of them is his nephew, Lot, probably. So Counselor, how does that sound for his opening statement? Pretty Socratic, yes. And then the angel said, well, if I find 50 innocent men in Sodom, I will spare the whole city for their sake. Okay. And Abraham said, forgive me if I dare speak again, Your Honor. I am merely dust. What a great, I'm nobody. But can I say something else? But what if 5 of the 50 innocent men are lacking? Would you destroy the whole city because of those 5? So he's bargaining down 50 to 45. I will not destroy it if there are 45. But what if there are 40? It's like, are you negotiating for some little trinket at the market? That's what it feels like. I will not destroy it for the sake of 40. Please don't be angry if I speak again. What if only 30 are found? Okay, 30, fine. Forgive me if I speak once more. What about 20? Okay, 20, fine. Don't be angry. One more, last time. 10 people. If you find 10 good people, then he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of those 10. Jesus, leave me alone. He didn't really say that. As soon as he had finished speaking with Abraham, the angel went away, and Abraham returned to his house, to his tent. So Abraham, here's what's about to happen, negotiates, bargains him down to 10 people. Surely Cleveland has 10 good people in it that it should not be destroyed. There got to be 10 good people over there. You disagree, Charles? And so, scene ends. And the two angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot, the nephew, sat before the city gate. And when he saw them, he went up to them and made a deep bow, and he said, "Please, gentlemen, spend the night in my house, good hospitality. Wash your feet. In the morning you can continue on your way." They said, "No, we'll stay out in the city square." But he kept pressing them until they agreed to go to his house. And when he got there, he made a meal and baked unleavened bread. Why unleavened bread? That's interesting.
It's interesting.
When was unleavened bread used before?
Well, later it's going to be used when they're leaving Egypt.
Oh, sorry, later. Later it's used when they're leaving Egypt. Hurry, don't wait around for it to rise. This is a speeded up type of thing. Before they had gone to bed, this is pretty rough. The men of Sodom surrounded the house, young and old, down to the last man, and they called out to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out so we can sleep with them." Can you imagine that mob around your place yelling this stuff? It's a very scary scene there. And Lot went to the entrance and shut the door behind him. Somehow, this is not a tent, right? This is a frame structure of some sort. And he said, "Friends, I beg you, don't do this wicked thing." Okay, he's protecting them. Then what he offers instead is just as repulsive. "Look, I've got 2 virgin daughters. Let me bring them out and you can do whatever you want to them." Now, does Lot qualify as one of the 10 righteous men at that point? I would say no. Don't do anything to the men because they've come under the shelter of my roof, but not the daughters you presumably love. And one of the men said, "Out of our way." And another said, "This fellow just got here, Lot. Now he's telling us what to do. Watch out, or you'll get even worse than them. Whatever we're about to do to those men, you'll get worse if you don't get out of our way." That is an unbelievably strong threat when you're surrounded by a mob after he's just offered his 2 daughters. I would say our spiritual forebears, Abraham, Noah, Lot, are not great moral paragons. They're pretty broken, shattered even people. "Watch out, you'll get even worse than them." And the mob pressed hard against Lot and moved in closer so as to break down the door. But the angels reached out, pulled Lot inside, and shut the door. And they struck the men at the entrance with a dazzling light, so they were blinded, and none of them could find the door. So, wow. I mean, I could see this in a movie very easily. And the beings, the angels said to Lot, "Everyone in your family, your sons, your daughters, or anyone else, take them out of this place, because its outcry is so loud, the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So that's why those 3 angels were there, to get rid of Sodom because of its lack of, sin, its total sin. And Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, "Hurry, get out of this place, the Lord is about to destroy it." But his sons-in-law thought he was joking. They laughed, didn't pay any attention. What do you think of that? Crazy man out saying this stuff. Is God going to come down and destroy Pittsburgh? Even if the Steelers don't even try, they're pathetic last Thursday. I was at the game, it was awful, lack of effort. Is God going to come down and, no, it's just stupid. They laughed him off. Big mistake. As soon as dawn came, the angel said to Lot, "Hurry, take your wife, the 2 daughters who are here, or you'll be crushed in the punishment of the city. Sons-in-law, too bad, so sad." And he still lingered, and the beings took him by the hand, and his wife and 2 daughters also. Since the Lord was merciful to him, they led them out and left them out of the city. And one of them said, "Run for your lives. Don't look back. Don't stop anywhere on the plains. Run to the hills, or you'll be crushed." And the Lord rained sulfur and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah and obliterated those cities and the whole plain and all the cities' inhabitants and everything that grew on the ground. And what did Lot's wife do? She looked back. She turned into a pillar of salt. Turned into a pillar of salt. Why in the world would she turn into a pillar of salt? She looked back. Sometimes when you leave a place, it's very hard not to think, oh, we had such good memories there. Oh, it was so great. Remember the two daughters, our two virgin daughters that you were going to give to those men to gang rape? They were born there. They grew up there. It's such a pleasant place. And she turned back and pillar of salt. So it's just Lot and the two daughters. Sons-in-law presumably got sulfur and fire and the rest of it. And in the morning, Abraham went back to the place where he had stood in the Lord's presence. And he looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah across the whole plain, and the smoke was rising like smoke from a furnace. So, what was the depravity of Sodom? What has historically been called the depravity, the sin of Sodom? It's a very important point. Sodomy, which would be usually male-male homosexual relations, often meant female to female. Is that what the story says at all? What does Judaism say, Aaron? We do need to just quickly.
Yeah, we'll do it quickly. We've covered a lot of ground. The sin of Sodom, which is described as so grave or so great that the city merited being destroyed, has typically, traditionally, there are references. We know we've made a verb of the word Sodom, right? That it was about sexual immorality of whatever type. But the rabbis in the Midrashic tradition, or the homiletical tradition, identified a number of different sins, as it were, that they used to inveigh against this kind of continued behavior. Not in these examples of being sexually immoral, but in various places. Sometimes it's referred to as lying, or the kinds of things that might be in the Ten Commandments. But two really interesting traditions come out of the rabbinic mind. The first is, are you familiar with, from mythology, the Procrustean bed? The idea that you're laid on this bed and you're either stretched on the rack, your arms and your legs so they pop out of the sockets, or you're squished such that everyone's of uniform size. That's the image. That everyone in Sodom, the sin the rabbis describe, reading into the text, right? It's not in the text, but read it into it, is that the sin of Sodom was conformity, or mandating unanimity of opinion, or that diverse opinions, minority opinions, right, aren't going to be tolerated at all. And you can write the sermon, if you would, about what the danger of making sure that everyone believes the same thing, we don't broker any doubt or difference. That's itself a rich conversation. And we can go in lots of directions about that. The other, which I think is really tantalizing and fascinating, is they posit that the sin of Sodom was that when a visitor, and we spoke about the significance with Abraham's example of what we owe to visitors by way of hospitality, a visitor would arrive in Sodom, and every citizen would give this individual a coin, a shekel, a dinar, whatever the currency was. In that way, this person would be able to buy food and provisions and continue to live among them. But all the Sodomites had also conspired to sell this person no food or drink. And that the game for Sodomites was that they would ostensibly give this person money, give them reason to believe that they would be welcomed and provided for here. They all had conspired to do nothing to benefit this person at all. The person would starve or strangle for lack of water and food, and then everyone would go back and get their coin and do it again. That's sort of a mind-blowing story. You can only imagine what went on in such a community where the felt need was to inveigh against that kind of behavior, where you encourage someone but actually don't do anything to help them, right? It's almost, I'm making a leap here, I don't mean to be so grotesque about it, but when someone has suffered a loss, a death, they've had a life reversal, and one says to them, if I can do anything for you, let me know. And the onus is now on the individual who's suffering to reach back out to the person who ostensibly wants to be helpful, as opposed to offering something concrete, bringing them a meal, mowing their lawn, taking their dry cleaning. I mean, whatever it is that someone might need in that moment. The sin of Sodom, according to the rabbis, was to pretend, as it were, or to engage in sort of a pantomime about being helpful, but instead to be completely self-focused and selfish in that way. There's more we could say about it, but they're using the idea of the sin of Sodom to give us an opportunity to say, if we were to write the story today, if in fact a city or a society were to be destroyed, what would bring that about? Right? What is it that exists in our society or in our culture or in our own heart that would be so great that we would want to make sure it never happens, and should it continue, we're going to destroy it?
Let me add a couple more. The book of Jeremiah says the sins of Sodom were adultery and lying. The book of Ezekiel said that you did not take care of the poor and needy. They were haughty, and that's the sin of Sodom, referred to different places. There are a couple other references in Psalms and things. The book of Jude, New Testament, says that likewise Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural lust, strange flesh, is how which is probably reference to wanting to have sex with an angel. It's a very interesting image there. I would say that how it's absolutely been translated is referred to homosexuality, but the text doesn't necessarily say that. The most interesting point to me is the angels were on their way to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah before that event happened, as bizarre as the whole thing was. I should say, when you say commentators, that means some people's opinion is. The newest one, I should say the most prevalent one, is it was lack of hospitality. That you would, instead of welcoming people, you give them a coin and then you all conspire not to sell them anything, then die and then take your money back. It's a pretend sham hospitality. Or, yes, welcome into our place, now we will rape and kill you and take all your stuff. It's a very dystopian view of the world. This has been used to ban people from church, to judge them, but I don't think that in any way is what the story means. Any last thoughts? Because Aaron's got to go. Michael, you should start walking.
Okay.
I'm particularly intrigued by Aaron's point that the rabbinic tradition holds that conformity is the problem. And one of the reasons the story of Sodom is always appealed to me is the great emphasis it places on the fact that God himself tolerates diverse opinions. Abraham bargains God
Yes.
down. God likes to be argued with Lot. God told him to go to the mountain. No, I can't go that far. I want to go to the nearby. All right. So I take a lot of comfort in the fact that God tolerates different opinions and likes to be argued with and challenged.
I like that too. So God likes to be argued with. It is very Jewish, that idea. Christian ideas, this is a generalization, but I find largely true, particularly with Greek and other influences. God is somehow perfect and untouchable and so on, whereas the biblical view of God is somebody you can argue with and be mad at. I remember growing up, it's like you can never be mad at God because God is perfect and who the heck are you? Whereas these characters are, that's a terrible idea, God, I don't want to do that at all. Or, I really build an ark out of gopher wood? That's a stupid idea. Sacrifice my son? Terrible idea. But that's a Jewish notion. I would suggest that Jewish notion of being in dialogue with God about the good and the bad is one of the best things that modern American Christians can do for their spiritual lives, is have a conversation rather than just, I would like these things, push the button, send them up to God, and then wait for, orders from like some supercomputer in the sky, rather than being in dialogue with the one who created and loved you. Aaron, you really got to go preach in 5 minutes.
I gotta go. Okay.
Thank you all. See you next week.